Hi everybody, today we have reached the letter O in our words that we are using to describe God. I'm sure that all the grown-ups knew that when we reached the letter O we would have a really big word to think about. Today we're going to learn that God is omnipotent. Wow, that's a big word, isn't it? It comes from two shorter words from the Latin language, omni, which means all or total, and potent, which means powerful. So omnipotent means God is all-powerful. We can break it down to make it a bit easier to remember. So the first part is om, then nip, o, tent. Om, nip, o, tent. Omnipotent. Can you say it with me? Omnipotent. How about we say it in a quiet voice? 1, 2, omnipotent. How about we say it in a happy voice? 1, 2, omnipotent. How about we say it in a robot voice? 1, 2, omnipotent. If you were in my class in school, I might be asking you to do it as if you were an opera singer, but I won't hurt your ears by trying that today. Maybe you could try it at home later on. God is omnipotent. That means that he is all-powerful and nothing is too difficult for him. There are lots of stories in the Bible that help us to see this. We're going to look at one of those today. But first, we need to go somewhere else. We have come to the shores of Loch Ness for today's story. But today's story did not take place on Loch Ness, but on the Sea of Galilee. Jesus and his disciples got into a boat to cross over to the other side of the lake. Jesus had been spending the day teaching people about God. When they got about halfway across, a huge storm blew up. The waves were crashing. Why not make some crashing noises now? The wind was howling. Can you make a sound like the wind howling? And the rain was pouring. Can you make a sound like the rain pouring? Now Jesus' disciples, many of them had been fishermen, but this was unlike any storm that they had experienced. They were so afraid, they thought they were going to die. They were so afraid. But Jesus was asleep at the back of the boat. They woke him up and they shouted, "Teacher, teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus stood up. He looked at the wind. He looked at the waves. He looked at the rain. He looked at the storm and he said, "Quiet, be still." And all of a sudden, all was quiet and all was still. His disciples were amazed and they said, "Who is this man that even the wind and the waves obey him?" Now we know the answer to that question. Jesus is the Son of God. There's a wind blowing here today, and if I said to the wind, "Stop," it wouldn't stop. But when Jesus says, "Stop," the wind stops. That's because Jesus is the Son of God, and today we've been learning that God is omnipotent, all-powerful. When Jesus was here on earth, he was fully God and fully man, and that means that whenever we look at what he did and what he was like, we can see what God was like. Because of course, way back in the beginning, God spoke and the earth was made. He has complete control over everything. He is all-powerful. In Matthew chapter 19, verse 26, we read, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." In our lives, we will come across things that seem far too difficult for us to cope with and to deal with. Things will happen that make us sad, that make us afraid, that we think we just can't deal with. But there is nothing that is impossible for God. We can always trust him. He has promised that he will never leave us. When the disciples were in the boat during the storm, whenever they were so afraid and Jesus calmed the storm, Jesus turned to them and said, "Why do you have such little faith?" You see, I think the disciples hadn't fully worked out exactly who was in the boat with them. They were in the boat with Jesus, the Son of God. Nothing was impossible for him. And sometimes in our lives, it's easy for us to forget who is with us. It's easy for us to forget that no matter what happens, God is with us and we can trust him, even with those things that we find really difficult, the things that we find sad, the things that we find scary. Lots of things happen in our world that are sad and scary because our world has been scarred and broken with sin. But God has promised that he will never leave us, that he will always be with us to help us, and that one day Jesus will return again to fix all those things in our world that are broken with sin. And he will take all those who have trusted him to forgive their sin to be with him in heaven, God's perfect home, a place where there is no more sadness, where there is no more sickness, where there is no more fear, where there is no more crying, where there is no more death. It's a perfect place. Remember, God is omnipotent. He is all-powerful. Nothing is impossible for him, and we can always trust him.